Legislature's back in session. I believe before we broke, we were going to take a vote on the issue of sending this bill back.
Mr. Speaker, before we broke, I did make a motion to send this bill back to committee. However, and it was based upon several things, and one of them was that there was a representation that this bill was materially different. And really, by the rules of our legislature, you, as the presiding officer of this body at this time, have the authority to make the ruling on whether this needs another public hearing. Mr. Speaker, what I'm going to do is I would like to withdraw my motion to send it back to committee, and I would just ask you if you would make a ruling on whether this is materially different, whether this bill is materially different from the one that was introduced. So at this point, Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my motion to send this bill back to committee.
With that as the determining factor, I mean, though my committee was the one that rewrote it, I would have to agree that it is materially different. It is a 3-page as opposed to a 90. No, I can't. I mean, you leave me with having to make the ruling. I understand. It's difficult because it was my committee that wrote this as a way of being able to resolve this. But if I have to rule on that issue, then I'm going to have to rule. I understand.
Well,
because otherwise I'm going to be stuck with the precedent of this. So
And Mr. Speaker, just a point of information. I know as the author, I've said that it was materially different, and I've quantified that by the approach. Everything that was heard during the hearing is what's in the bill. It's just the approach and what we're taking, which I think really gives more flexibility and latitude to the department that's going to be tasked. So if that's the case, maybe we can ask the good senator to keep his motion on the floor.
I can be overruled. But I'm just saying, when push comes to shove, I have to rule the way that I believe it had to be ruled.
Mr. Speaker, may I confer? May I have a minute recess? I'd like to confer with the author of this. And again, he heard my concerns, but like I said, there is a lot of merit to this bill. Perhaps if I could just have a moment to speak with the author.
Please.
Thank you.
The chair has ruled. I understand that there's going to be a challenge to the ruling. All those in favor of overruling the determination by the chair, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes. Last person to speak. Anybody on the main motion? After Senator Espaldon, anyone else wish to speak on the main motion? If not, Senator Rodriguez, do you wish to close?
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you very much for your patience with this and your support in getting this through your committee. I want to thank all our colleagues who participated in the discussion of this measure. It's, no doubt, Mr. Speaker, it's a very complex issue. But the approach that we have done here in terms of getting this bill through, having it as an exhibit to a bill that directs the Department of Public Health to go out and seek this waiver is really a good start. We've talked about 2019 when the federal money, the Affordable Care Act money, is set to run out. That's in 15 months, Mr. Speaker. And so every day that we prolong and wait is a day that we're not getting closer to what I think is everyone's goal here, is to provide access to care for our people. Some of the things I'd just like to be able to speak about briefly, Mr. Speaker. One of them is universal health care. We've heard that this is hopefully something that will take us into some sort of universal health care if this pilot program does succeed. But in reality, Mr. Speaker, we already have a universal health care program on Guam. It's called the Guam Memorial Hospital Program. When an individual does not have health insurance, when they get sick, where do they end up? They end up at the Guam Memorial Hospital. And it may be free for that individual, but nothing is free in the hospital. Nothing is free in life. Somebody pays for that. The employers who right now, I understand, are resistant to perhaps an eventual employer mandate, or for our insurance partners who are resistant because they don't want to pay this 4% assessment, it affects them. When that individual that ends up at GMH needs a bypass or needs prolonged care, it affects them because when the premiums go up, when we have to every 2 years go out and borrow money to bail out the hospital, it affects you and I. It affects every taxpayer. And so it's really a bad way of how we're funding this universal health program that we have today, Mr. Speaker. We're funding it in the back end, when really what this initiative does is work to get us to fund health care on the front end, when our people have access to preventative care, to primary care, to wellness programs. That's where our focus and our investment should be, and not when it's too late for them, when it's going to cost us even more. And so I'm asking my colleagues to please support this measure. This is a first step. We're going to have to come back and do steps 2 and 3. I'm hoping in this body as well. But it's really a step in the right direction to get our community to where we need to be in terms of health care. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file, any objection? Next on the agenda, Bill 148, Senator Luis Muñoz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to place Bill number 148-34 in the third reading file, and I'd like to speak on it.
Any objection? Hearing none, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill number 148-34 COR is an act to add a new subsection 28205 to Article 2, Chapter 28, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to allowing merit award recipients to use their awards at the Guam Community College for their freshman and sophomore years. Mr. Speaker, the Merit Award Program grants four-year scholarships to the top graduates of public, private, and ODEA high schools. Currently, the award covers tuition, fees, and stipends at the University of Guam. Bill number 148-34 extends the use of these scholarships to the Guam Community College for the first 2 years. Since merit awards are four-year scholarships, students who select the GCC option would attend GCC for the first 2 years and UOG for the last 2 years. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 148-34 is supported by both administrations of both GCC and UOG. GCC has assured and addressed UOG's concerns of the awardees completing their timeline, and I feel that this will strengthen the relationship of both institutions. As an alumni of GCC, I'm very proud of the accomplishments of GCC in the last decade, and I also feel that our best and brightest students will benefit from both institutions. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I hope my colleagues will support this and feel the same way that I do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. On the main motion, any senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard on 148? Senator Espaldon?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do have an amendment that's being copied right now, but again, if there are any other speakers who would like to speak before I proffer the amendment, but I just don't, I had to come up and speak and mention that because if nobody else spoke, then you would have called it. And I think that an amendment is appropriate at this time.
Okay. Senator San Augustine.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this bill. Just let it be known to our colleagues that the students are aware, and both GC and University of Guam will be monitoring the program. And if the students do not meet the criteria to continue on, then their merit award would end right there after their second year. But I'm in support of this bill.
Thank you very much, Senator San Augustine. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the author of this bill for this initiative. I rise in support of this bill. I just want to bring up a couple of things. You know, it is not new that we allow merit scholarship awards to UOG. However, GCC has also been, through the direction of the President, Mary Okada, has also been a strong force in promoting vocational curriculum and careers. And so not everyone learns the same. Not everyone is able to do a four-year institution right out of high school. Being a teacher myself, I see the challenges that our youth face trying to find themselves in what they enjoy doing and their own identity and what they'd like to do as they continue to grow as an adult. And so I believe this is an awesome initiative to help our youth. And I want to thank the sponsor for this, and also that we recognize that the Guam Community College is a significant member of our education, our higher education as a part of this island. So I rise in support of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill, on the main motion? Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in support of this bill. I just have a couple questions. If the sponsor would yield, I wanted to clarify if there were other sections of the code that also reference, in regards to the merit award, referenced the University of Guam that were not changed, and I'm wondering if that is intentional, like section 28201. So the bill amends 28205, but 28201 has two references to specifically University of Guam. One that says awardees are entitled to 4 years of education at the University of Guam. And do we need to amend that, or is it okay to just only amend this other section?
Do you yield?
Yes, thank you. There is a notwithstanding clause in this bill, so notwithstanding any other provision of the law.
Well, I don't have any objection. I just want to make sure that we're doing it correctly. So, yeah, this is, and it's just a little bit different. It says to use it for their freshman and sophomore years, as opposed to the UOG says you can use this for 4 years of education, and I hope that's the same. So, but otherwise, my commendations to the sponsor and to, of course, the GCC. I agree with the previous speakers that this, I've seen many students who, when I was teaching at UOG, who began at GCC, and they were very diligent, and it seemed very helpful to them to have gone through GCC first. So I wish them the best, and I hope for the success of this program.
Thank you. Senator Espaldon,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the time to get this amendment copied. And I believe this will actually address the concern of the previous speaker. So I'd like to proffer the amendment that has been passed out. And at the very end of, excuse me, after sophomore years, a new sentence begins. And this is basically, excuse me, it was crafted because of certain recommendations that were made at the public hearing by the University of Guam officials. And so this is the amendment that I hope covers those concerns. And the amendment will read, the University of Guam shall collaborate with the Guam Community College to ensure merit award recipients are fully aware of the timeline for graduation, the courses that are approved for transfer as cited in the various articulation agreements, and any procedures needing to be put in place for the use of merit award benefits at the Guam Community College. Because right now, all of the merit program is all with the University of Guam. So to make sure that there is a blending of interests in this, to be able to share these awards with GCC, again, this all basically just puts in place that there will be collaboration between the University of Guam and GCC to make sure that all merit award recipients will become fully aware of all the requirements to graduate within that 4-year period. So this is the amendment, and I hope I can get support on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
thank you very much, Senator. On the Espaldon amendment to the main motion, any senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to be heard on the Espaldon amendment? Any objection to the Espaldon amendment? There being none, it's adopted. Back to the main motion. On the main motion as amended by Senator Espaldon, any senator wish to be heard on the main motion?
Just in closing on my time, Mr. Speaker, with this addition, I definitely fully support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion, Bill 148? If not, Senator Munier, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just really quickly, I just want to thank all my colleagues for their support in this measure, and I want to thank the author for the amendment as well too. I guess it's safe to say that we shouldn't assume that everything is going to fall into place, and sometimes we just have to put it in writing. So I thank the author of the amendment, and I thank everyone for their full support, and I'm sure the GCC, the institution, also thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion to send 148 to the voting file. Any objection? Hearing none. Next on the agenda, Bill 156, Senator Torres.
Stuart Mossy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the body accept Bill 156-34 COR as amended by the Committee on General Government Operations and Federal, Foreign, and Regional Affairs.
On that motion, any objection?
I further move, Mr. Speaker, that Bill number 156-34 be moved to the third reading file and that I be allowed to speak on the measure.
Any objection? Hearing none, you recognize.
Thank you. Bill number 156 is an act to amend Section 6108 of Chapter 6 of all of Title III and 15206 and 15211, all of Title 3, Chapter 15, all of Title 3, GCA, relative to changing the date of the primary election and the date of filing candidate nomination papers. Mr. Speaker, this bill was introduced upon the recommendation of the Commission, the Guam Election Commission, based on the adverse impact of the primary elections date on the GEC's workload requirement and expenses. It is believed that moving Guam's primary election just a few weeks earlier could save taxpayers a significant amount of money. It would cut down on the overtime costs for the GEC Commission by changing the date to the first Saturday of August rather than the last Saturday, and also expanding the timeline for filing of nomination papers. Right now, under Guam law, nomination papers for candidates are due at least 60 days prior to the date for holding the primary elections. Absentee ballots are also required to be mailed or transmitted by email to absentee voters within 48 hours of request or within 48 hours of certification of the ballots, whichever is later. As a result of this, the Guam Election Commission has roughly 2 weeks between the last day that nomination papers are due and the date of the primary election to mail off-island ballots. The workers at the Guam Election Commission are given merely an average of 13 days from the point of the certification of the election to mail off absentee ballots before the general election. So the director of the Guam Election Commission brought up this situation, and primarily it was in response to a question at the budget hearings about why there was so much money being spent on overtime. And it was her recommendation, Mr. Speaker, that we consider moving up the primary date. And it was discussed by her, the director, that we could remedy the constraints that are placed on them by amending the language with the primary elections, which is what this bill does. By changing the deadline, and it seems rather simple, and it is rather simple, by changing the deadline, the GEC will have an advantage of 30 days of preparation after the date to file nominating papers, and an additional 3 to 4 weeks of preparation between the primary and general elections, which not only allows the GEC to conduct elections with better efficiency and without substantial overtime expenses, but it also gives the parties and the general public a lot more breathing time to prepare for the general election. But in short, this bill is really a measure to address what was identified to the Guam Legislature during the budget hearing as a practical problem that they're experiencing, with a very practical and simple solution. And that essentially is what this bill does. By moving up the date, giving more time for nomination papers, it just gives the Election Commission more breathing time. And in giving them more breathing time, it cuts down on the rush to complete their tasks in sending out absentee ballots and the like. And by alleviating the crush, it alleviates the overtime and lessens the burden. And when you think about what a primary election cost, it cost about $400,000. The director identified that overtime is about $90,000. So it seems logical on our part that we would want to save that amount of money, because that money could then be reinvested into the Election Commission for equipment or for other needs that would allow for their efficiency and also for greater access by the voters to either the registration process or to pertinent information. So I ask my colleagues to please consider this bill. It is a housekeeping bill. It's a practical bill, but more so it was prompted upon the recommendation of the Guam Election Commission. So I felt that it was incumbent on us to respond to that very simple request of theirs to save what is not an insignificant amount of money. $90,000 is $90,000. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? On the main motion, Senator Estevez.
Mr. Speaker, it's probably more of just a point of information. I'm really trying to think it through. Considering we have 2 bills on the agenda that affect the primary election, I'm just really curious what would happen if both bills were to pass and get signed into law. Would one actually cancels out the primary election in general? How does that work with this particular piece of legislation? I mean, how can one potentially supersede another? And I know it may not seem related, but considering that even though they're different pieces of legislation, it's still related to the same subject, I just want to be clear as I discern.
I'll have to check with legal counsel on that. I'm not going to give it legal advice. The advice I was given by legal counsel is that it would depend on which bill, if both are passed by this body, which bill the governor signs last. Which bill the governor signs last. So if the legislature passed both, it would depend on which one was signed first and which one was signed after. Because the second one would overrule the first. Anything further, Senator Estevez?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with that in mind, considering that both are substantial in their own rights, while I have no issue with the bill and the merits that are discussed with it, I would still like to reserve the opportunity to come back up pending other discussion on the bill itself, but I intend to make a motion to potentially request to either set this aside pending the outcome of a bill that might remove the primary election in totality, just to ensure that the intent of both bills, based on their passage at the merit, that they both meet the merit that they deserve.
It's just that we may pass them both, but we never know which one the governor, if the governor is going to sign either or both or neither. So we can pass both, and it's up to the governor. But the decision on whether or not we want to move the primary date, because not only of the fiscal savings, financial savings, but also to assist the Election Commission to meet with its federal obligation to make sure that the ballots get out to especially the servicemen that are stationed throughout the world, get their ballots in time so that their ballots get back in time so that it's counted. It'd be tragic that the people that are fighting to keep our ability to be able to vote in this democracy aren't able to vote, and that was the reason why, I can't remember, Unicava, I think it's something like that, requires that the ballots be sent out early enough to make sure that it's received back. So both of them are good in their own right, and we leave it to the governor then to decide if we're going to have a primary at all.
Mr. Speaker, I'd have to say I'm not satisfied with that answer. It's this body that makes the determination, and it's the prerogative of the governor to veto that initiative, and then it's the prerogative of this body to decide whether or not to override it, and that's the process. Again, my concern with pushing this forward is if both pass, there's no way to determine, because they were both equally passed and duly adopted by this body, which one should take precedent, which should be the determination of this body. While I do respect the merits of this bill, and I do wholeheartedly support it, I think it's important that we end up answering the first question is whether or not we're going to actually have a primary. And so at this time, I make a motion that if possible, that we set this aside.
There's an objection.
Mr.
Torres.
Mr. Speaker, I don't feel that it's necessary to set this aside, and I thought about this as well. But part of the issue here is we are now in the end of October. If we're going to make any improvements to the primary process for the Guam Election Commission, it has to be now, and that's why this measure is being introduced at this session, because we have to allow ample leeway. There are considerations, as you pointed out, with the effectiveness of getting ballots to the absentee ballots or the off-island ballots to the Guam voters out in time and back. And then we run into the practical situation where if in one given month you have 5 Saturdays, the law presently tells you to have that, it's the last Saturday. Well, what if there's a 5th Saturday? That shortens the time, makes it almost impossible to meet that requirement, the federal requirement to send out. So my point is, while yes, there is another measure to potentially eliminate the primary process, that should not stop us from acting on what exists now. What exists now is a primary system and a general election system. And there's nothing wrong with passing a measure to improve upon that. If the body is split between whether they want a primary or not, that's a rather unusual situation. I think that anybody that supports this type of a measure generally supports a primary election. Anyone that is against this measure and supports the elimination of a primary, I can't imagine that we would both vote for both. I'm taking this position because I believe in a primary process, and I believe in improving a primary process, and I also believe in trying to facilitate the GEC in their mandate to be a part of the primary process and to help conduct it. So I don't think it's necessary. I think that there are two competing issues, and I think that two competing issues can come before this body, and this body can decide. You're either for a primary or against a primary. If you're for a primary, here's a bill that can help improve upon the process. If you're against a primary, then clearly this bill shouldn't have no interest to you. But I say let's go forward, and if it comes to the unlikely chance that both pass, well, then that's the governor's prerogative to decide which of the two he wants to sign into law. And if it is also the body's further prerogative to override his veto, then that can be done. So there is a process to carry it through, and I think that it's not inappropriate that they both go before the body. But it was in the interest of time, Mr. Speaker, that I put it forth at this session, knowing that there was a competing bill.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I really respect the comments by the retiring speaker, and I do understand. And again, I don't agree, though, it's as simple as one bill means you support a primary and one bill means you don't. It's really not that simple of a matter. Furthermore, that the legislative intent of this bill is not specify vote for this if you support a primary election. That's not the case at all. However, at this time I will withdraw my motion, with the understanding that I will be making another motion if this bill is moved into the voting file, that we move to vote on this bill based on information from legal counsel that the last bill to be signed into law becomes a superseding bill. And I think it would be prudent with two competing measures that are completely separate in many ways, that this bill, which addresses based on the urgency that I'm understanding with the Guam Election Commission, for it to get, if the body does so decide to pass this into law, to be transmitted for signature by the governor. And then when the voting comes, as this body makes its determination whether or not they want a primary election or not, then that law will be now the superseding law if signed by the governor.
We'll deal with that when you make that motion. Senator Adams.
Mr. Speaker, I object to placing conditions upon the disposition of a bill based on some presumption of what's going to happen to one bill or the other. I think that each bill should be deliberated upon and voted upon by this body, and if both of them pass, then so be it. Then that responsibility to decide which goes and which doesn't, that's up to the governor. But I don't recall ever having seen where, the outcome of a bill is going to be contingent upon the presumption of the outcome of another bill. It's just I've never heard of that. So all these motions about condition this on that, presuming this or that, I just disagree with that. Thank you.
Thank you. On the main motion, the bill as introduced, as amended by the Committee on Government and All Operations. Any senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Torres, you're welcome to close.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the retiring speaker for that sentiment. It's true, we do have to look at each measure for what it is. And I just encourage my colleagues to please consider favorably this bill. It's an act that we can take one little step to help save the government much needed resources. And if you can look at it in that light, and also the fact that it adds an added advantage to ensuring that ballots are mailed in advance with much more ample time for receipt, execution, and for sending back to Guam. I mean, that is, for me, compelling reason enough to support such a measure. If you want to consider all those people who vote absentee, this actually does them more good than anybody else. And it also gives the Election Commission much needed relief from overtime expenses and added resources to accomplish their mission. Sidus Maasi.
On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file, is there an objection? Hearing none. Next on the agenda, Bill 158. Senator Torres.
Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill number 158-34 COR on the third reading file, and if I may speak on it briefly.
Hearing no objection, you're recognized.
Thank you. Bill number 158-34 seeks to modernize Guam statute regarding the choices of names upon marriage. What's in a name, the English playwright William Shakespeare famously asked? Well, a lot, many experts say. Names are important not just to the person that is given the name, but also to the community where the person belongs. This bill allows applicants for a Guam marriage license greater options to change the middle name and surname by which each party wishes to be known upon marriage. Either party who desires to change his or her name, last name, or middle name may indicate such election on a marriage license application. As we all may recall, in 2015, this body passed the Guam Marriage Equality Act, which removed the language in Guam statute that defined marriage as a union between persons of the opposite sex. So the intent of this bill is to update Section 3108 and Section 3202 of Chapter 3, Title 19, Guam Code Annotated, to ensure that it corresponds with current statutes pertaining to equality in civil marriages by providing name equality for spouses upon marriage. This bill will give a spouse the option of retaining his or her middle name and surnames before marriage as their middle and surnames after marriage. A spouse may also elect to adopt the middle name and surnames of the other spouse, or a combination of the middle and surnames of both spouses. And with statute, the election on the marriage application becomes a record of the name change legally. What I'm trying to do with this bill is address, again, it's a housekeeping bill and it's modernizing a statute, but I started off with that phrase, what's in a name? And under current statute, we're limited to the choices of names upon marriage. There are options, right, 3 options for us on the books right now. We can keep our names, we can take our spouse's name, or we could hyphenate our names with our spouse's names. But it doesn't address the middle name, which in our culture is quite a big deal for many of us, particularly for women. Our statute right now doesn't allow us, a literal read of it doesn't allow us to change our middle names. And there are circumstances that I've heard of where people have had to go to court when they want to retain their middle names or change their middle names upon marriage. For example, if my name were Mary Sue Camacho and I married Mr. Torres, my name would, upon marriage, be Mary Sue Torres. And that's what I'm talking about. It's that practical thing where this bill now provides for middle names where it didn't before. but more so, Mr. Speaker, is when we look at the Marriage Equality Act, we know that the traditional marriage relationship has changed, and as such, that the spouses now perhaps have a greater desire to have some options in how they want the names of their union and their future families to be reflected. And so this bill, I believe, provides for it. It's nothing very different from the Name Equality Act of 2007 that was adopted by California. It's very much like that. So it's not a novel idea. It's not an unusual idea. It's just a modern way of addressing very non-traditional ways that people now enter civil marriages, and how those people choose to have their names going forward. So I hope that my colleagues will, look at this. I know that sometimes we think that only earth-shattering legislation is worth our attention, but sometimes it's the little things that really matter most to people in the long run. After all, our name is the one thing that outlives us. And if we can have a greater choice of names upon marriage, and that's generally when most people change their names, is when they get married, then why not? Let's do this, and let's do it now, especially since most recently we passed the Marriage Equality Act, and the whole paradigm of couples, families, and how you choose the name that you would now have upon marriage has kind of changed. So I encourage everybody to please give this your favorable consideration, and let's just modernize this one aspect that is languishing in Guam law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the main motion, Bill 158, any senator wish to be heard? 158 on the main motion, Senator Lee.
Sister Smasi, Mr. Speaker, and I want to also thank the author of this legislation. I was taking a look at the public hearing when this bill was being heard, and also just in communication with people as I went about my daily work, and this idea, this measure, this bill would come up in conversation. And some people kind of scoffed at the idea. They would roll their eyes, I don't know why, you're committing your time. And a majority of those people were men, and a majority of them don't have to worry about changing their name. And so I just wanted to take a moment and really think about what a lengthy process it is to change your name when you get married, if you choose to do that. And I really commend the author of this bill for giving the people in our community, both men and women, a choice. Your name is a very important part of who you are. And when I got married, I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. I had to go to the Social Security office and the Department of Motor Vehicles and the passport office and all my banks to get all of my different cards changed. And maybe some people in our community don't have to worry about that because they'll never have to change their name, and that's great for them. But for the rest of us who might be considering that, I think this bill kind of speaks to that. And also just historically, it's a good opportunity for us to kind of think back about just a few short decades ago how wedded couples were viewed as one person under the law. The one person was the husband. The husband's identity superseded his wife's. The husband was the only person who could vote, the only person who could hold property, the only person who could go to the law, etc. And so I think that if you might be opposing this legislation, you might want to ask yourself why. Maybe because it doesn't directly affect you, but you should also think about ensuring that everybody in our community has a choice to make. And when you make something, a choice, as, something as personal as your name choice, that we should make sure that it's something that's easy for people who want to engage in this. And I think we can all agree that a marriage should be a partnership, not one person over the other. And so again, I commend the author for putting forward this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? Vice Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I echo the sentiments of the previous speaker and the author. And I commend the author because, yes, although some people in the public would criticize her efforts in this regard, I commend her because this is something that really only women are forced to deal with right now, and it's something that actually may come as a bit of a surprise when you're getting married, that you're very limited as to what names you can adopt or choose, select, apply for is really what you're doing. And so I think, yes, it's a great effort. It's very specific as to what the bill is very specific and what names it is allowing. And it's very clear, and I commend the author again, that it's requiring you either use your current surname in some type of combination or the surname of your spouse. And so it's tight in, it doesn't allow for any type of potential fraud by using this process to change your name to something altogether different. So, but I do think that this is something that's very important at this time of, in women's lives when they're getting married, that they have this capacity to change. And actually this allows both spouses, or I think it allows both spouses to have that type of option also. So again, I thank the sponsor, and I do think it is important, and Situs Masi for your efforts in this regard.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? On the main motion, if not, Senator Torres, you're welcome to close.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to propose an amendment to add the following co-sponsors to the bill: Senator Regine Bisco-Lee, Senator Therese Terlahi, Senator Luis Muña, and Senator Talina Nelson.
Hearing no objection. On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file. Next bill on the agenda, Bill 161. Senator San Augustine.
Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill 161-34 COR on the third reading file. I would like to discuss it.
Hearing no objection, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Bill 161-34 is in reference to an act to rescind administrative jurisdiction of lot number 5173 2-R2 known as the Tamuning Multipurpose Field, and a portion of lot number 5173-3 granted Chamorro Trust Commission lands inventory and to vest the office of the Tumon Harmon Mayor with the administrative jurisdiction of the same. For the past 30 years, my colleagues, the Mayor's Office of Tamuning has been managing and maintaining that property for their youth, for their baseball games and other sports they've conducted. And this bill just basically asks that it be transferred from the Chamorro Land Trust inventory to the administrative control of the Tamuning Mayor. It's only 1.5 acres, not 8.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Also, Mr. Speaker, I've passed out a colored picture of what it looks like so that everybody can see it's in between Tamuning Elementary and LBJ.
Thank you. On On the main motion, any senator wish to be heard on the main motion? On the main motion, Vice Speaker, and then Senator Espaldon. No, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I stand in support of this bill. However, I mean, we want the mayors of Tamuning have been diligent in use of this property, upkeep of this property. But there were several things that were brought up at the public hearing that that were not fully addressed in the bill. So I guess I wanted to just confirm that. First of all, I had asked whether the Chamorro Land Trust Commission had, there's no resolution from them regarding this transfer, approving this transfer, and or administrative. The words of the bill have been changed now to say, rescind administrative jurisdiction granted to CLTC lands to CLTC. And to vest and to Tamuning to Monmayer with administrative jurisdiction. So I was just trying to see what was the Chamorro Land Trust's position on this, and if they had passed a resolution in support. And my other questions were, when the Department of Land Management...
Why don't we get them answered first? Go ahead, Senator
Mr. Speaker, the information I've been getting from my staff on the Chamorro Land folks, they haven't had quorum yet, but they're in favor of transferring it to the Tamuning mayor. That's the word I've gotten from some of the members.
Thank you. Your next question?
Yes. My other question was, the Department of Land Management Director had recommended a couple things that were not included in the final version of the bill. These are that well, oh yes, dealing with those other portions of the other parcels of property that I guess are in this map. There were other parcels that he thought should be squared away at the same time. Administrative transfer of 707 square meter portion of 5173-new-3 and a transfer of 4,878 square meter portion of 5173-new-3 from CLTC to DOE, because that's the property that's currently being used by Tamuning Elementary, and to include a provision in the bill that in the event the property remains idle and not used for the intent of the village youth activities, the property shall revert to the Chamorro Land Trust. Oh no, sorry, that is included in the bill. My apologies. So I guess I wanted to find out why we were not addressing those other two pieces of property. Is that because of the materially different provision?
The DOE transfer would probably have to be a separate bill, administrative.
Well, Mr. Speaker, one of the problems they had there was when they built the fence at the school. I wish we were all there today and you would see it. They built a fence, but then part of the fence didn't even include some of that part of the property they gave to DOE. So Land Management advised the staff when they were putting together that they already did the survey. That's why it was written the way it was written, the bill. So it included the property it needed to include to complete the property that they'll be getting. Because what Carbolito has is that, correct, not Carbolito, BJ, I think it's LBJ, they're already fenced in. So it won't disrupt the area they're at in DOE. Neither will it disrupt too many elementaries.
Any further questions, Madam Speaker?
No further questions, Mr. Speaker, but on the bill, I would just like to say I am grateful that the bill includes a provision that says that the property shall not be sold, leased, assigned, or otherwise disposed of. The mayor in her testimony described how there's current property under the jurisdiction of the mayor that they had allowed someone to use for a fresh produce stand, that has since been converted into like a mom and pop store. And she's trying to get the property back or get control of that back. It went way beyond what they had originally intended, I guess. But yeah, I just think so we have to be careful of these transfers, that we also give the mayors the tools that they need to control the use. And as we discussed with one of the other bills on our session agenda, this week, that wait, Mr. Speaker, just 1 second. Yeah, I would like to include, I don't have the language, but I would like to draft language to include a restriction that this property be used for recreational or sports facilities, and because I think that is the current use. Is that consistent with the intent of the sponsor? Could I get some time, Mr. Speaker, to just add that restriction? I guess it would be, it would only be in section 2 of the bill. So when it says authorizes to rescind administrative jurisdiction, administrative jurisdiction of said lots shall vest with the office of Tamuning Tumon Harmon Mayor and shall be used for purposes of sports and other recreational activities.
Yes.
What line?
On line, it looks like on page 2, line 16. At the very end of the paragraph, when it transfers to Tamuning, we add in the words for use as sports or recreational. What did I say? Yeah.
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, I would like to mirror the other language in the other bill, Mr. Speaker, if I could.
All right.
It's only about 1.5 acres. It's not a large property. So if we're going to assume that they're going to build a Harmon sports complex, it's not going to happen. They'll probably fix up their little skate ring and then clean up their baseball field. It's not a large property.
I'll give you time, Vice Speaker, to write the amendment you wish. And any other senator wish to be heard on the Senator Ada?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I just want to respond to the question as to whether there's a resolution from the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, and it is correct that they've been having quorum issues. But it has been discussed, and I believe there are minutes. In their minutes, it will reflect that this particular issue has been discussed, and certainly the executive director too has given his full support. But there's been nothing negative that has come from the land trust. They're very sensitive about taking land out of their inventory, so that has not been the case. The other thing, of course, is on page 2, line 14, reference is made to the descriptions of the lots and as depicted on the proposed land management lot scheme number M19-S and attached as Exhibit A. So there is no Exhibit A, and so that needs to be resolved. This was reported out of committee with the understanding that the sponsor would obtain that Exhibit A to be attached as was referenced on here. So I just bring that up as a point of information.
Is that the map that's on the committee report?
Yes, it is on the committee report. But, Mr. Speaker, I asked the staff, the pagers, to pass this out yesterday. The Exhibit
No, I
A.
know, but it has to be attached to the bill. We had a major problem a couple of sessions ago with exhibits.
Understood.
And to make sure that if the
But the
exec
copy I
says-
have today, Mr. Speaker, came from the committee report, not what was found on everybody's desk. And it has the exhibits on it.
Okay. Make sure it's circulated and it's understood that when the engrossed bill comes out, that there is an exhibit.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. This thing that was passed out today it's a
No, not the photograph. There's a map that's in the committee report. Not a Google. Oh, okay.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. They did pass this out earlier today. The Exhibit A, I believe it circulated earlier this morning.
Okay. You all got it, but we didn't up here, so. So does everybody have an exhibit? And I want to make sure that the clerks attach it so that when it goes, when it's engrossed, it has an exhibit. It's not a Google map, it's an actual map from land management. Okay. We'll take a short recess and make sure that we all have the proper exhibit so that Senator Snogstein.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that on Bill 161 that we set it aside so we can get a copy of a more current map, because we're trying to read this map and this is bad for us young folks to read it. It's hard to read. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. On that motion, hearing no objection, so ordered. Senator Abbott, 170.
Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill 170-34 COR as amended by the Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform into the third reading, and I'd like to speak on it.
Hearing no objection.
Mr. Speaker, Bill 170 is probably going to be the simplest bill that we're going to handle this session. So, this is really a housekeeping bill, and back in 2011, the law was passed which establishes the northern and the southern soil and water conservation districts. And in the law, it defines basically, for example, the northern soil and water conservation district means the area organized pursuant to this act as that area covering the northern area of Guam. And further on, the definition for the southern soil and water conservation district is that area covering the northern or the southern area of Guam. But we don't know where north begins and where that delineation is. So what Bill 170 does is it simply further defines that, for example, for the Northern Soil and Water Conservation District, it provides further definition, as you will see on page 3, line 41, that the area covering the northern area of Guam is the entire area designated as Northern Guam by the Water and Environmental Research Institute. University of Guam is published in the 2007 geological map, so on, as amended with the Adelup-Pago Fault extending. So it gives a technical definition of where that line of demarcation is. And it further goes on line 47, it says, see attached map. And so the attached map, unfortunately, this is black and white here, but the colored map, if you take a look at the last page of the attached map, it shows that that line of demarcation goes right by Pago Bay, and everything north of that area covers the Northern Soil and Water Conservation District, and everything south of that down to Longfit, Asan, all that is considered as the Southern Soil and Water Conservation District. So that's all that Bill 170 does, using the technical delineation described that was obtained from WARI.
Thank you, Senator. Any senator wish to be heard on Bill 170? On the main motion, Bill 170. Any senator wish to be recognized? If not, go, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to propose a question if the sponsor is willing. The question is, how did they determine the boundary of the northern and southern soil water conservation? How is the boundary determined?
Mr. Speaker, the line of demarcation was provided to us from WARI. How they came about, I don't know. However, I have no reason to question the validity of the input provided by Wary. I think it has to do with the following the Adelup-Pago fault. So it reads there, as you see on line 45.
I believe that's correct, because along that fault, north of it is the geological makeup of the soil is different than the southern part, where the red dirt is and where the coral is to the north.
And I also propose that question, Mr. Speaker, because soil and water conservation is very important. Many of us don't pay a lot of attention to it, but this entity is really supposed to protect the rights of the people with their natural resources. And so my concern is the aquifers, where they run, and the amount of toxic waste that has been placed in certain areas. So I was just wondering if it's just because of them determining it through the kind of geological makeup of the soil. I just wanted to see if they considered the aquifers and where they run and the whole system that it goes through it, because that's also very important as well. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Addy, did you wish to add anything else? Okay. Okay, any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? On Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too was at the public hearing. All parties, both the northern and the southern soil conservation districts, actually confirm that they're definitely in agreement with this delineation of territory, and really it's so that they can start working with the farmers and all the people around that they really should be serving, and making sure they understand who they should be serving. And you're right, Mr. Speaker, the delineation by Wary was according to the soil types. We have more the clayish type down south, we have a different type of soil type, and a lot more limestone up north. And again, the two basic districts basically will address those the type of conservation they need to employ depending on the type of soil types that they have to work with. So I rise in full support of this measure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Espaldon. Any other senator wish to be heard on the motion, on the main motion, Bill 170? If not, Senator Addy, you're welcome to close. On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file, Senator Addy, you're recognized on Bill 172.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bill 172-34 is if you just give me a minute, second here. Can you? Winston, can you pass these out, please? Make sure the speaker gets one first. What I'm passing out here, Mr. Speaker, is an aerial photograph of the area that we're talking about, so that everyone can kind of, and also a picture of what is involved here. What Bill 172 does is it seeks to appropriate the amount of $34,312 from the Chamorro Land Trust Survey and Infrastructure Fund to the Chamorro Land Trust Commission for the reimbursement of leasehold improvements on a CLTC leased lot in Dedido, which is being voluntarily surrendered by the current holder of the lease. So here, let me break it down real quickly. Right now, the lessee that's occupying this lot number 11 is an elderly lady who poor health, and her daughter has come back to Guam and wants to take the mom back to the States to where she can receive better care and also under her watch during these, last years that she has. But the lessee is asking to be reimbursed for the improvements that have been made on the lot. And the law does allow the Chamorro Land Trust law, in fact, 21 GCA Section 75109A states in part that upon the surrender of a lease by the lessee, the Commission shall appraise the value of all such improvements and shall pay to the lessee the value thereof, less any indebtedness to the Commission or for taxes or for any other indebtedness, which has been assured by the Commission from the lessee. And so that was done. The current lessee has come in asking, can you reimburse me for the improvements that I have made? The Chamorro Land Trust got three appraisals done, and the average of the three appraisals was the amount, comes out to the amount of $34,312. But now we require legislation to appropriate that money from the land survey, from the Chamorro Land Trust Survey and Infrastructure Fund. Now, as far as I know, this is the first time that Chamorro Land Trust has actually exercised this part of the law to reimburse a current lessee for the investments made. But the reason why the Chamorro Land Trust has opted to do this and accommodate the current lessee is, one, for humanitarian reasons for the current lessee, so that she can recoup her investment and her daughter can take her back to the States to where better care is available for her. Additionally then, by clearing up this, by making this property available, it will enable the Chamorro Land Trust to be able to move another lessee into there. Someone else who's already got a current lease, but what had happened with this lessee that's to be moved in was that that lessee and a third lessee, they were erroneously put on the same half-acre property. And so as a result, the two occupants of that half-acre property aren't able to develop the property because they need at least a half-acre because there's no sewer available in the area. And so basically what we're doing here is by then accommodating the elderly lessee, it allows Chamorro Land Trust to move lessee number 2 into that property, and then now lessee number 3 will now be able to have the entire half-acre. Lessee number 3 is a veteran. Lessee number 3 went through all the process of applying for a loan to be able to build a home for his family, but cannot build a home because the lot is too small. So basically, with this one action of reimbursing and clearing out that one property, we are able to take care of all 3 of these individuals. And so that, Mr. Speaker, hopefully I didn't confuse anyone. That's what Bill 172 does. And on that graphic that I passed out, the area that we're talking about is out there by the municipal golf course. back there in the vicinity of where the former transfer station is in Lerdo. On the second page, you'll see this is the backside. Yes, it has had some graffiti on it, but this is the front view of the house. That's a concrete house on the right side there, and then that was an old structure, a temporary structure that was built, which is still usable. And on the last page is a rear view of the house. So that's basically what is being reimbursed for $34,000. The bill was originally introduced last year, or in the last legislature, but it didn't get acted on, and so it died, simply because the committee had asked that, you know, we won't make these shifts until we are definite about who's moving where. So that, Mr. Speaker, is the gist of Bill 172, partly for humanitarian reasons and to rectify an error that was made earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Nelson, any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, this bill brings a lot of questions to mind. I am most certainly supporting the intent of the bill, you know, for the humanitarian reasons, as the sponsor stated. But my question is, and perhaps, you know, perhaps the sponsor of the bill could educate me a little bit. It says that in page 1, line 11 and forward, it says, upon the surrender of a lease by the lessee, the Commission shall appraise the value of all such improvements and shall pay to the previous lessee the value thereof, less any indebtedness to the Commission or for taxes or for any other indebtedness, the payment of which has been assured by the Commission from the deceased lessee or previous lessee. So my question with this 21 GCA subsection 75109 is that I understand that we are now leasing out Chamorro Land Trust property for commercial purposes, and so I guess my question is this a requirement by law, according to 21 GCA, that if a business that is leasing out this Chamorro Land Trust property wants to return the lease or to break away from the lease, that we also, this will be a kind of foundation or a reference, if we pass this bill, that it would be utilized for that specific purpose? Does that make sense?
If she's asking to yield, I'll yield.
Yes, if you may, yes, please, if you could yield.
Well, first of all, we're talking about a residential lot here, and the circumstances would be quite different. Now, with a commercial lot, I don't know. I recall vaguely some of the provisions of a commercial lease. You know, what happens if you decide I want out? There are provisions in the leases. I'm not sure exactly, but I think, I know that in this case, with this particular lot that we're talking about, it was taken as an individual case. It was looked at, and the Commission made a decision in it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it now opens up Pandora's box.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's my, I guess that's my challenge with this bill. You know, I will have to do further research on it, because I'm just thinking that if we do something this small today, does it open up a domino effect and allow perhaps businesses to negate, and us as a government having to pay for improvements that were done on the Chamorro Land Trust property? So, yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Espaldon?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good discourse. But again, within the intent of this legislation, the author, and he may have mentioned it previously, that he did cite the Guam Code Annotated, Title 21 GCA 75109A, which states in part, quote, upon the surrender of a lease by the lessee, the Commission shall appraise the value of all such improvements and shall pay to the previous lessee the value thereof, less any indebtedness to the Commission or for taxes or for any other indebtedness, the payment of which has been assured by the Commission from the deceased lessees or previous lessee. So in other words, it is an existing law that this is allowed at this time. If one of our colleagues would like to amend the law, I believe this is the section that she would have to amend. But it seems to me that by citing this section of the law as it is right now, this appropriation to reimburse the leaseholder for the improvements that were made is appropriate. So I just want to bring that to the attention of the body. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Did you have another question? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for your patience. Yes, that's my concern because I'm not sure about the requirements with the commercial leases. I know that some of the incumbents were here for that specific bill that is now law, so perhaps they can enlighten on the commercial requirements for the leases. I think it was done last term.
Mr. Speaker, there's no need to enlighten the Speaker because the bill before us right now basically addresses not a commercial lease, but basically an agricultural lease, of which only one. And again, if there's an amendment to be made to the law concerning this, concerning commercial leases, I believe it should be made in another bill. And I think that in itself will have its own day in this legislature. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was at the public hearing for this, and I don't have any objection to this transaction. It's one of those that was foreseen by the original statute to buy a person out who had made improvements to the property. I just have a couple of questions that I can't find the answers to in the committee report. One of the issues raised was, again, whether the Chamorro Land Trust Commission had passed a resolution or otherwise approved this, and according to the director they had, and they were going to provide the minutes of the meeting, but I haven't seen those. And the other thing is, so the statute authorizes this transaction to be made out of, the payment shall be made out of the loan fund. And so I guess that's why we needed this statute, is because we're not using the loan fund, we're now using the Chamorro Land Trust Survey and Infrastructure Fund. So I don't have an objection to that, but I was wondering if the author could yield to, the rest of the statute says, such payment shall be made out of the loan fund and shall be considered an advance, therefrom reimbursable out of payments made by the successor or successors to the tract involved. And I'm wondering if CLTC, I mean, if they recognize that, and so are they giving them this house, the successor to this house, as payment for taking their house on the other property? Is Is that the exchange, like a equal value exchange is what they're saying?
So if the speaker is asking me to yield, I will.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So first of all, if you look on page 2, line 14, it starts there with notwithstanding 21 GCA 75, section 75, 124B. And I believe that had to do with the loan fund, correct? And the problem is there's no money in the loan fund. There's money in the survey and infrastructure fund, and the sources for that basically comes from the sale of bull cart trails or remnants and whatnot. So that's why money is, the $34,000 is being appropriated from that particular fund. Now, insofar as we'll call it lessee number 2 that is being relocated into there, actually the Chamorro Land Commission actually looked at the current residential facility that individual is living in, and they figured out if we were to basically replace that structure, re-hook up to anywhere else, the cost of hooking up the utility infrastructure, it was going to come up to about, in fact, it was probably going to come up to, I believe, something like around $34,000. So for that reason, then the Chamorro Land Commission basically says, why don't we just move out lessee number 1, reimburse them for their improvements that they've made, relocate lessee number 2 down to that house, and then everybody is made whole after that. So that's how that came about.
Satisfactory, Madam Vice Speaker?
Well, is there any, if the author may yield just to the final question as to whether there are minutes that show the Chamorro Land Trust's consideration of this bill?
Mr. Speaker, if it was not in the in the committee report, I'll have to get a hold of the commission to get a copy of that. That means then I guess we would have, until that question is satisfied, is it the wish then of the speaker, your wish that we set aside this bill so that you can see the minutes?
No, I'm just asking that that be provided prior to voting, if that's available.
I understand. And okay, prior to the vote at the very least then, and we would do that.
Thank you. Thank you for yielding, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, yeah, I rise in support of the bill. It looks like the trust is doing its, well, this transaction complies as close as possible to the original statute, with the exception of the availability of funds in the loan fund. And so authorizing the amount from another fund, I have no objection to that, and I appreciate the efforts of the sponsor to accommodate the needs of the parties that are involved here and the humanitarian needs, especially Sizus Masi.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Abbott, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I really struggled with this bill because, again, I just asked my colleagues to favorably consider it for humanitarian reasons and really to be able to rectify a situation created by the government wherein 2 lessees were put in a half-acre lot, and in that current situation they are unable to construct a home on a small lot. So it actually will benefit, this one action will benefit 3 Chamorro Land Trust lessees. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion to send the bill 170 down to the voting file, any objection? Thank you. Vice Speaker, you recognized on Bill 175.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to place Bill 175 as amended by the Committee on Culture and Justice on the third reading file and would like to speak on the bill.
Hearing no objection.
The intent of Bill 175-34 is to clarify the existing definition of family violence in our statutes. Just last month, the Supreme Court of Guam reversed a family violence conviction because they opined that 9 GCA section 30.10A2 regarding the definition of family violence was unconstitutionally vague. The Supreme Court of Guam in People versus Shimizu determined that the language in the statute defining family violence, which includes the phrase, quote, placing a family or household member in fear of bodily injury, unquote, did not provide fair notice to ordinary citizens as to what conduct it prohibits, and it did not establish minimal guidelines to govern law enforcement. So this bill is intended to clarify the definition of family violence by adding the words reasonable and imminent to the existing statute so that it would read, quote, and you'll see this on section 2 of the bill, 2A2, placing another family or household member in reasonable fear of imminent bodily injury. During the public hearing for this bill, we heard from the Chief Prosecutor of the Office of the Attorney General, the Public Defender Service Corporation, the Victim Advocates Reaching Out, Vero, and they gave suggestions how to strengthen the statute, address the concerns in the Supreme Court decision. We used that discussion to amend the language of the statute, looked at other jurisdictions through the NCSL, and most state family violence laws utilize similar language to what is proposed in this bill. Family violence continues to be a serious issue for our community, and according to the Judiciary's 2016 annual report, over the last 3 years, family violence has consistently been the top offense charged of all the cases annually. In 2016, there were 494 cases involving family violence charges, and 128 of them were felony offenses. It's important that the legislature act swiftly to amend the statute in accordance with the Supreme Court's ruling so that the victims of family violence can be protected through the prosecution of the perpetrators. I ask my colleagues to support this bill and so that we can ensure Guam's family violence laws are enforceable immediately and that family violence cases are successfully prosecuted. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker, and thank you for introducing this and trying to get it through during Family Violence Month, October. Senator Senator Lee, did you wish to be recognized? Any other senator after Senator Lee? Senator Muñoz, then Senator Torres.
Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the author of this legislation very much for swiftly introducing this piece of legislation so we can make sure that we address this issue right away. I attended the public hearing, and as the author had mentioned, we heard from stakeholders like the Attorney General's office, the public defender, and our community stakeholders like Vero and a number of other community folks who deal with this issue day in and day out. And they're just really urging us to act swiftly to make sure that we address this so that we can make sure that our children and our families are safer and that those who commit acts of family violence can be held to their crimes. There were several recommendations that were given by these stakeholders and changes that were made to the bill. So again, I really want to thank the author for taking the time to do the research, on this to make the appropriate amendments, and I stand in full support of this bill, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Munya.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in support of this bill, and had an opportunity to represent the legislature at the Family Violence Awareness Resolution presentation. And just the feeling amongst all the families who were affected and victimized by this family violence was so emotional, and I wouldn't wish that upon anybody else. So I do thank the author of this bill, and I rise in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Camacho-Torres.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to echo the sentiments of the retiring speakers, and would like to also commend the author for paying attention to the detail, especially when there are court cases and decisions that we can very effectively act on to improve upon the process. But where we can provide fair notice as to what conduct is prohibited to ensure that the statute establishes required guidelines for law enforcement and also guidelines to victims is very important. So I stand in full support and commend her for this bill.
Thank you very much. Any other Senator? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too rise in support of this bill. It was very unfortunate that this had occurred, that this case was thrown out because of some technicality involving semantics. But a lot of people do suffer before they are abused by a family member or any form of domestic violence. They do suffer in fear, and for this bill to actually attend to that fear, because it creates an environment where the suffering is real and you cannot avoid it. And so I'm very grateful to the sponsor for this bill, and to put in the proper verbiage to protect those before the acts of harm, of physical violence that are done onto them. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? On the main motion? Madam Vice Speaker, you're welcome to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to very sincerely thank my colleagues, and particularly Senator Regine Bisco-Lee, for attending the public hearing, and my colleagues who stood in support of this bill and who have always supported our efforts in regards to family violence, especially you, Mr. Speaker. And I would ask that to amend the sponsorship of the bill to add Senator Bisco-Lee, Senator Munya, Senator Torres, and Senator Nelson.
Hearing no objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again to my colleagues.
On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file, any objection? Senator Adder, you're recognized on Bill 200.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to accept Bill 200-34 COR as corrected by the prime sponsor and substituted on the floor. And
on that motion,
that version is being passed around.
I believe everybody is now receiving that substitute on the floor. It was just handed out just now, senators. Okay. On the motion to accept. On the motion to accept, hearing no objection.
Mr. Speaker, I move to then place Bill 200-34 COR as corrected by the prime sponsor and substituted on the floor into third reading file, and I'd like to discuss it.
Hearing no objection, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Bill 200-34 and the version as substituted, the one in front of us now that's been accepted, is really identical to Bill 111-34, which this body had passed at the last session, but was vetoed by the governor for basically a language which was deemed by the governor's office to be a violation of the bond covenant. And if you recall, that particular language was basically talking about the offending language, which resulted in the veto of the previous bill, was basically language that said that all the working capital, cash, payables, receivables, and all that would be received other than the 2016 limited obligation Section 30 bond. So because of that phrase, the governor's office deemed that this would be a violation of the bond covenant. Now, I immediately then introduced Bill 200-34 without that particular phrase. And I think what's important at this point is that the provisions provided in Bill 200 is what is needed, is one of the last pieces that's needed in order for the turnover or the termination of the receivership of our solid waste management operations. And so, you know, again, Bill 200 basically does 6 things. One is it mandates the Guam Solid Waste Authority Board to develop a compensation and classification plan to establish a basis for the hiring of classified employees. And that is necessary because the current workforce needs are met through contractual services with a private human resource company. So they don't really have any existing classified employees except maybe the handful that were transferred over from DPW at the beginning of the receivership. The second thing that Bill 200 does is it assures the classified employees, those that came over when the receivership started, they were at the DPW Solid Waste Division. It basically just assures those classified employees that when the receivership ends and now this operation comes under the Solid Waste Authority, that they will remain whole. The third thing that Bill 200 does is that in order to maintain stability during this transition, during and after the transition, it allows basically 3 things. One, it allows the Solid Waste Authority to retain non-government employees. There's about 3 of them that were hired directly by the receiver, and they can be retained for up to 3 years, assuming that in that time period, the board would have developed classified positions, and that then these employees, if they want to become government employees, of course, will have to compete through the merit system to be able to fill those positions. The second thing that it would do is it allows the existing manpower contractual arrangements to continue for up to 3 years. So right now you got this human resource company that provides the necessary solid waste technicians, and they'll continue doing that for a period of up to 3 years. So if the board is able to develop the positions and compensation plan, and they can start hiring against that, and if they can do that within a year, then fine. We start then going through the process of classifying employees through the merit system. The third thing that does is that there's also a lot of operational contracts that's currently in place. For example, who repairs the trucks, and I guess whatever other operational contracts and obligations there are, is to allow them to maintain those contracts for, again, up to 3 years. At least give them enough time to be able to get in there, get their feet wet, and keep the service at the level that it's at. The fourth thing that it does is that the bill requires the Public Utilities Commission to conduct a management audit in order to establish a baseline within 60 days from the enactment of this bill, and to the maximum extent possible to try and complete it before December 30th. That way, when the Solid Waste Authority takes over, we kind of really have a much better idea of what it is that we're taking over. Fifth, it allows for current rates and charges to remain in effect. However, the board must file a rate adjustment petition within 180 days from the date of termination of the receivership. Now, this is where really the concern, I think, that was raised by this body in the last session, the concern that as soon as GSWA receives takes over the operation, that immediately the rates are going to go up. Well, we're asking for the PUC that a petition be submitted to the PUC so that they can actually take a look to see if the current rates cover all the expenses of the organization. Now, the concern is that the burden of the debt service, the $12 million a year or whatever, I'm not sure how much it is, the debt service, that's going to fall squarely on the authority. That's a debate that needs to be had, because surely if the authority has to take over that burden, those rates will go up, as opposed to continue having the Section 30 funds subsidize the operation. But that's a debate that needs to be had, but I contend that it does not need to be had right now, because our primary objective should be to end this receivership. And then once we end that receivership, then this is an in-house debate that needs to be made as to, do we continue to subsidize the operation or do we, increase the rates so that it basically pays for everything that it costs to include the debt service to keep this operation going. And finally, it delegates to the the Solid Waste Authority Board of Directors procurement authority for supplies, services, and construction. And the bill clearly says that, of course, it requires that the procurement staff must undergo the training as required by public law right now. And so Bill 200 has been reviewed, of course. This has been put together in collaboration with the Attorney General's office. The receiver has looked at it. The governor's office has looked at it. So at this point right now, everyone is comfortable that Bill 200 meets the requirements for at least that final step, or at least one of those requirements. So I ask the body to favorably consider Bill 200 so that we can achieve the purpose of terminating the receivership. Let us take over that responsibility. Then from that point, then we will have the discussions of, are we going to continue to subsidize it? Should Section 30 money continue to pay for the debt service? And what we charge the people is just the tipping fees to pay for the operations, or what? That's a debate that can come later. But for now, we want to get our house back. We want to get out of this receivership. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. On the main motion, any senator wish to be heard? On the main motion, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to rise to put on the record my concerns about the increase in fees for solid waste if they take on that bond that is the source of the revised bill. And I would like to point to page 4 of the new bill, or the revised bill, page 4, subsection B, where it mandates that the authority prepare a petition for adjustment of rates and transmit it within 180 days. And I would make a motion to delete that section, Mr. Speaker, because the rest of the bill authorizes the authority to conduct a rate review if it wants, and to take it before the PUC in accordance with PUC existing procedures, and gives them all other authority. But I think the legislature has no reason to mandate that it be done within 180 days of termination of the receivership. I think we should leave it to them to do as they see fit. And as the previous speaker said, if the legislature is going to consider whether we are going to raise fees to include the debt, I think this would also, just allow that to happen, and concurrently with the rate review that the board has already said they are undertaking a rate study, I guess, of their current rates, or they will do that as soon as possible. So I would just suggest that we give them the autonomy that they are asking for, and that we not mandate that they submit a rate petition for adjustment within 180 days, Mr. Speaker.
On the Chalahi amendment, any senator wish to be heard? Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, that provision was put in there, page 4, starting at line 18. Oh, wait a minute. What was that section?
Subsection B, line 3 through 6.
Oh, yes. Okay. The reason why that subparagraph B was put in there about requiring the authority was because the current tipping fees that we are being charged was developed by the receiver and approved by the district court. In Guam law, the Public Utilities Commission is really the only body that is authorized to set the rates for the entities that comes under it. And so the Guam Solid Waste Authority is defined by Guam law as a utility, and all utilities are governed by the Public Utilities Commission. Now, I think maybe we need to, we are then, if we don't require that a rate review be made within a certain period, then we are assuming that in fact the rates that was put in place by the receiver is fine. It doesn't need to be adjusted downward. It doesn't need to be adjusted upward. In fact, I'm not sure when the current tipping fees were established. So, if it was established a couple of years ago, maybe the cost of operation is warrants a rate adjustment upwards. But I think the sooner we get over there to have the Public Utilities Commission review these rates, then we can better determine if the rates are where it's supposed to be, at least the operational rates. Maybe as a compromise, instead of just leaving it wide open and, you can go over there and submit your rate petition anytime, whenever you think you're ready. Maybe we should then go ahead and say that it should be accomplished. No, give them more time. But if I think that these rates need to be reviewed.
Thank you, Senator. On the Terlahi amendment to Bill 200, any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too had concern with this particular section because bottom line, it reads, the authority shall prepare a petition for adjustment of rates and transmit the petition to the PUC. And I understand the author's explanation that the PUC is really the committee that sets rates. However, in the previous subsection, the rates, basically it says the rates and charges for the collection in effect at the time of this enactment shall remain in effect and shall be adopted by the authority. So in other words, the rates are already there. Let's keep them there. Now the author then said, well, maybe we need to adjust it because rates might need to go up or need to go down. And I think really the real approach is not so much to ask the PUC to adjust the rates. Maybe the real action that should be taken is whether the rates are viable as they stand. So in other words, there'll be no action to adjust the rates. The real action, I think, is the determination that needs to be made whether the rates as we accept them as they are right now are appropriate, whether they're too high or they're too low. Once they make that determination, that's the time that you actually go to the PUC and ask for the adjustment. But to mandate an adjustment without even the determination whether the rates should go up or whether they should go down seems to be putting the cart before the horse. Unless the action is to ask the PUC to make that determination. Are these rates appropriate for the operation that we run? But I have a concern also that the way this reads, that the authority shall prepare a petition for adjustment of rates. What if there is no adjustment that's necessary, is the question. And I'm not posing that to the author, but it does raise a concern, and so I might be supportive of the motion to delete this.
All right, thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard on the Terlahi amendment? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very complex issue, and I'd like to thank the sponsor for his mentorship in regards to the situation of GSWA, and also his sharing his knowledge with me about the situation that we face with the federal receivership. I believe and support the fact that this needs to be done, but also I'm on the same page as the proffer of the amendment, where it says that the PUC shall be the transmittal to the PUC shall be accomplished no later than 180 days from the date of termination of the federal receivership. I think the action, as the previous speaker pointed out, that there does need to be a rate review within this agency, because just being present in the being present for the decision of Judge Francis Tidinko Gatewood was very disconcerting to me, because it seemed like there was no requirement for several years now to pay down this debt service from the federal receivership. So it's like they're hoarding a bunch of, they're hoarding millions of dollars, but they're not paying into the debt. And so my concern also is to see the rates rise if we push this within no later than 180 days. And the ripple effect that it will have in our community, I mean, we're only paying $30 for our trash to be collected, but the amounts of illegal dumping and that is being done around our island is unprecedented. And so my concern is, if we push this 180 days, it stems to raise the rates, at an earlier date, and then our island will be one big trash can. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the amendment to just strike item B on section 4?
Yes, it is.
So, yeah, I think the author is, so that, Mr. Speaker, that basically will mean that if, that seems like the trigger for item C and the rest to, won't be able to take effect without item B. So, you know, I'm thinking if the mover of this amendment was to strike this, there will be no longer need for the rest. That's.
No, I think B is just the 180 days, but C is the procedure by which they're going to be doing any rate adjustment at any time,
But isn't
now
there,
or in the future.
Isn't there the initial process is to petition the PUC? That's always been the process, that there have to be a petition for a rate adjustment.
Yes, but the C starts with the authority shall not submit any proposed change until following the following actions have occurred. This is the procedure for future action on any rate change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and if I may add that in the enabling legislation for the new authority, this solid waste authority, it did give them the authorization to submit petitions at any time to the PUC. Yes, so you're correct, Mr. Speaker. I am only asking that we remove this mandatory that they must submit one within 180 days. All utilities now submit when they feel it's necessary. And so that's all I want to do is remove the 180 days requirement so that they will continue as originally established to submit their proposals when they feel it's necessary. And the board has appeared before the legislature a couple times already, and the chairman of the board, Mr. Gale, has made it very clear that that's one of his first priorities is to review the rates in-house first and then make a determination what to do. And so I would just leave them to do that, and I'm sure that we can trust that to them.
Thank you. On the motion is, to strike B, is there any objection? There being no objection on the main motion.
If I may continue, Mr. Speaker, I just had one more item to. Oh, okay, on page 3, there was an additional change made to the bill that added, just let me make sure, page 3. C. Yes, it added the words on subsection C, short term. Line 1. Top of page 3, subsection C. I think the bill that was passed before, that was passed and sent to the governor read all contracts, obligations, services. So these words are being added, short-term, operational, and they're highlighted. And so I was just going to ask, because I was at the district court when they were talking about what contracts were being put in place between the hearing and the termination of the receivership, and there were some very long contracts being pushed, 28-year terms, and I was very concerned about that the receiver is being allowed to negotiate those contracts right now before the Solid Waste Authority takes over, and that those contracts would be in effect for 28 years. But I am curious, what are we not addressing long-term contracts here, and what was the intent behind the inclusion of the words short-term, operational? If the author would yield, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. First of all, what the hell is that? on page 3, line 1, you see there shaded all short-term operational contracts. Now that particular phrase was also in the last version that was actually passed. And the intent of putting in, because we were trying to, at the time, we were trying to differentiate between, for example, the bond obligations. That would be considered a long-term obligation. And we were talking about really the short terms, the human resource contract, for example, for solid waste technicians. I imagine there's a contract with a mechanic shop to repair. Those are short-term contracts. And that if those carry over into the transition period, we will only keep it in place for up to 3 years. Again, we're just trying to maintain some kind of stability during this transition. But when we put in there short-term operational, because the retiring speaker is correct, the contract for the operation and management of La Zone, I understand that is a long-term contract of something like around 5 years or maybe even longer. So that wouldn't be touched. But we're looking about those that would basically, expire, those that expire on the day of turnover or within 3 years. Those are the ones that we're looking at.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and that he's correct. That is included in the bill that was passed last time, so it was my mistake, and I appreciate the explanation, so I have no objection to that portion. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? On the main motion? If not, Senator Addett, you're welcome to close. On the motion to send the Bill 200 to the voting file, and it's Bill 200 as substituted on the floor. Corrected by the main sponsor and substituted on the floor. Okay? Let's take a recess until 10 tomorrow morning.